August 24th, 2005. I'm Ted Koppel, and this is Nightline. Tonight, the story of what for anyone would be a nightmare. He was an American citizen, a Navy veteran, but he was arrested in Iraq as a suspected terrorist.
And then we hear voices coming toward us, and they're already yelling. So we got some more terrorists here, and then once they approach, they take the blindfold off, and they go, "You here to kill Americans? You effing terrorists, you here to kill Americans?"
He was held for 55 days, 53 of those in solitary confinement, 49 before he had a hearing, and he was innocent. Cyrus, why do this? Why put yourself through another interview?
I'd like to bring awareness to something that I feel is jeopardizing American lives in Iraq. There's a reckless arrest policy, and there's tremendous amount of humiliation that follows that arrest policy. And I strongly believe that one of the major reasons that the insurgency in Iraq is growing is because when detainees are released, they come out and they're looking for retribution. Even if they are neutral or pro-American, once they get out, they're no longer neutral. They're no longer pro-American. They're angry.
Tonight, 55 days, one man's account of an American detention camp from the inside. Is Cyrus Carr a little naive? Oh yes, perhaps even to the point of boneheadedness. Why else travel to Afghanistan and Iraq in the middle of a war to shoot a documentary on a Persian king who's been dead for 2,500 years?
The only way Cyrus could have entered the city is if the gates were opened from the inside.
Carr tracked Cyrus the Great's conquests from Tajikistan through Afghanistan, Iran, and Turkey. Cyrus the Great, genuinely one of history's towering figures. America's own founders, including Thomas Jefferson, were influenced by Cyrus the Great in the field of human rights. As Cyrus Carr filmed the story of his great Persian namesake, only one major piece of the puzzle remained: Iraq. And when all is said and done, the question is whether doing something naive, even a little foolish, in a war zone at a time when everybody's nerves are on edge, whether that warrants almost 2 months in solitary confinement. Cyrus Carr, after all, is an American, a veteran who served in the U.S. Navy, and, if anybody cares, he even supports the war in Iraq. He was in the country legally. He had permission to shoot his documentary. And then, one day, he and his Iranian cameraman hired an Iraqi taxi driver to take them to the outskirts of Baghdad. They were stopped at a police roadblock. The Iraqi police told the driver to pop his trunk, and there they found a bag of washing machine timers, which can be and have been used to set off roadside bombs. All of a sudden, Cyrus Carr's story about shooting a documentary on Cyrus the Great sounded pathetically thin. So the Iraqi taxi driver, the Iranian cameraman, and Cyrus Carr were taken to a police station about 50 miles north of Baghdad.
Once we're at the police station, that's when I revealed that I'm a U.S. citizen and you know, what we're doing. And I showed him my permit to film and everything. And
you had your passport with you?
Passport, everything, yeah. An hour passes, and I said, "Look, can I call the U.S. Embassy?" And they said, "Don't worry, we've called the U.S. military, and they'll be here in an hour." So the U.S. military comes, and they strut right by me, and just mumble, "So these are the guys," and go into the room, close the door, and never asked us a single question. And suddenly, an Iraqi policeman comes out and takes me by the hand, turns me around forcefully, takes off my watch, puts handcuffs on me, and blindfolds me. And next thing you know, we're being leaded out. We're being let out. And I can hear American voices. And through the blindfold, I'm talking to him. I'm saying, I'm a U.S. citizen, and I'd like to speak with the U.S. Embassy. And they said, no talking. And so at that point, the official transfer takes place from Iraqi custody into U.S. custody. And the Poliwada detention camp is adjacent to that police station, and they walk us into the American detention camp. And I said, listen, I'm a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces. Is this how you treat your own? And he said, everything's for a reason. And then they...
What is the rank of the person who's dealing with you? Do you know?
I don't. I was blindfolded at the time.
Okay.
And so he places me on the ground, dirt floor, with a blanket and a bottle of water, but still tied with flexicuffs behind my back in a fetal position, blindfolded. And that's how we sat for 7 hours. And around 1 o'clock in the morning, I get a tap on the shoulder. I nearly jump out of my skin, and an American voice says, get up. And so I get up, and he leads me into an interrogation room, takes the blindfolds off, and they snap a picture.
Were they having trouble accepting that you're an American?
Well, I think so, because they took my passport apart to make sure, to see whether it's authentic or not. So that would lead me to believe that they had their doubts about my American citizenship. And my VA card was in my wallet. The way it began was he first asked me, what are you doing here? And at that point, I was still indignant. I still had some kick in me. And I said, you know, what took you 7 hours to ask me that? I mean, we've been sitting there in a fetal position for all this time. You could have asked me that a long time ago. And he said, hey, I'm asking the questions. And I said, well, I'm here making a documentary film. And he said, I'm going to ask you one more time, what are you doing here? And I said, well, I'm going to tell you one more time. I'm here making I'm an independent filmmaker from Los Angeles, and I'm making a documentary film. And then he looks at the other two on his sides, and he says, could you guys excuse us, please? And they leave the room, close the door, and he says, now, I'm going to ask you again, what are you doing here? I said, I'm a filmmaker. He said, I gave you a chance to tell the truth. And I said, and I took it. and he said, okay, guys, come back in. It seemed to be the extent of the good cop, bad cop scenario. And then the other Americans started saying, you're in big trouble. You're in big trouble. The highest levels of government are going to know about you. Don Rumsfeld, President Bush, they're all going to know about you. You're the next John Walker Lynn. So what are you talking about? And he said, and then he brings the timers. He goes, have you ever seen these before? I said, yeah, I saw them when they were bringing him into the police station. He said, do you know what these are? I said, no. They look like hot water gauges, you know, and he said, these are timers that can be used in IEDs. I said, well, they're not ours.
The explosive devices.
Right.
Right.
And he said, you expect us to believe that? I said, yeah, they're the drivers. He goes, you actually think he's going to admit that those are his? And I said, well, why don't you ask him? He comes back to me and he says, hey, Cy, I just wanted to let you know the driver admitted that the timers were his. I said, great. And at this point, I thought that, okay, we're just being held now until dawn, because they don't want to release us at 3 o'clock in the morning. So dawn comes and the sun comes out, and we're now being battered by the sun until about 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
You're still in that open cage.
Right.
And it's what time of year?
It's May 18th.
So it's starting to get hot.
Yeah, real hot. And a few minutes later, they take us back into the same interrogation room. And suddenly I see my map of Iraq laid out with my camera, microphone wires strung out, and the washing machine timers neatly placed in order. And we were told to kneel down in front of them. And they snapped a photo. And after they did that, the same gentleman that I referred to as the ringleader from the night before comes up to me and goes, "Hey, Cy, how you doing?" And I said, "Pretty bad." And he said, "Why is that?" I said, "Because you know damn well that those aren't ours." He goes, "Oh yeah, I know, but you know, I know that. I put that in my report. Don't worry about it."
That picture would eventually be used as evidence against him. Blindfolded, his hands tied behind his back, Cyrus Carr was placed inside a U.S. Army Humvee. It was so hot, he says, that on the drive to Tikrit, their next stop, he passed in and out of consciousness. In Tikrit, it was decided that he should be taken to another prison in Baghdad, Abu Ghraib. So you get to where you're going, and
then we hear voices coming toward us, and they're already yelling. So we got some more terrorists here, and then once they approach, they take the blindfold off, and they go, "You here to kill Americans? You effing terrorists, you here to kill Americans?" And at that point, the punch had been taken out of me. I wasn't responding. And he's pulling me up, "Get the F up, get the F up." And he's got a handful of skin as he's pulling me up. Skin comes loose, shirt rips, and they're leading us into the processing area, which looked like a lobby, and there's a whole lot of other MPs inside that lobby, women included, and once we're inside the lobby, they make us face the wall, standing this time, and they tell us to put our heads up against the wall. My head was about 2 inches from the wall, so he grabs my head. He said, "I told you to put your effing head up against the wall." He slams it against the cinder block. And then he tells my cameraman to strip. And my cameraman doesn't speak English. And so he says it in Arabic. And my cameraman doesn't speak Arabic. So he says, "You trying to be funny? You trying to be funny?" And at that point, I finally spoke up and I said, "Look, he's not trying to be funny. He just doesn't understand what you're saying." He goes, "Well, tell him to take his effing clothes off." And so I said, "Farshid, take your clothes off right now." And so he takes his clothes off. They take me into another room, and they start laughing at him.
It was determined that Cyrus Carr, as an American citizen, could not be kept at Abu Ghraib. His Iranian cameraman, however, could and was. At which point does the treatment become, and when I say treatment, I don't mean physical treatment, but your treatment as someone who feels he is entitled to certain rights. At which point do you feel that those rights were denied you?
From the moment that we were taken into captivity. You know, forgive me, but I apply the same civil rights that I'm afforded here to my experience in Iraq.
Because? I mean, this is not a war zone over here. That is. Things are different in a war zone.
There are places in Compton that they have
would
probably the
qualify
same,
as a war zone?
Would qualify as a war zone.
And you know, during those initial stages when gang members are rousted in Compton, you've seen them slam face down on the hoods of cars.
Sure.
The LA cops use tactics that are probably less genteel than the ones that were applied to you. I'm just saying there is a difference between being in the United States and being over in the middle of a war zone with what sounds like a sort of bizarre mission. I mean, if you'll forgive me for putting it that way. I understand. I accept totally that you feel strongly about Cyrus the Great. You believe that this documentary is an important thing and something you should do. I can also accept that some 22-year-old or 25-year-old soldier over in Iraq takes one look at you and says, no one in his right mind would come over here to do that if they didn't have to. It's not so strange that a bunch of young soldiers who are really worried about what's going to happen to them and whether they're going to make it back in one piece, that they would view you with suspicion bordering on hostility, at least for those first few days.
I understand suspicion. I don't understand wanton hostility. And it was wanton. We were cooperating all the way. And it's, in fact, for the very reason that they don't know that it's so important to respect their civil rights, because they don't know if they have a guilty person or an innocent person. If, which is often the case from my experience, it's an innocent person, they have just teed off somebody. They've just alienated somebody. They've just shown a side of America that is un-American to an innocent person, to an innocent Iraqi.
By the end of the second day of Cyrus Carr's captivity, he was taken from Abu Ghraib to the detention camp at Baghdad Airport, the prison Camp Cropper. One of the other inmates there, Saddam Hussein. And what happens to you when you get to Camp Cropper?
Suddenly, civility. They said, step on the scale as they're processing me. Take your clothes off, get in this jumpsuit. And, but, you know, at this point, any act of civility was welcomed. And they gave me a shower right there. And they took me to the shower, and then they took me to my cell.
All right, so now it's the middle of the night, day 3. And what happens? They let you sleep?
Yeah. Slept like a log because I hadn't slept at all the night before. And the next morning, when I woke up, I was really disappointed to find out that it wasn't just a bad dream and that I was actually in the cell. And that's where I stayed for the next 53 days.
Cyrus Carr's story would be checked out by the FBI within a few days, but getting a hearing by the military's detainee status board, that would take 47 days. And after they cleared him, 6 more days to be released. More on that tomorrow. The taxi driver, he's still being held. A final note in a moment. There was, in this morning's Washington Post, a riveting story of an attempted escape by Iraqi prisoners from a U.S. military prison camp. They had dug a tunnel 15 feet deep, 357 feet long. It was quite a piece of engineering, and if one of their fellow prisoners had not blown the whistle on them hours before the actual break was planned, it's likely that a couple of hundred prisoners or more might have escaped. What makes that relevant to Cyrus Carr's story is that the U.S. military is now holding well over 10,000 such prisoners. Of those, it's estimated that about 2,500, 1 in 4, did nothing wrong. Whose estimate is that? The U.S. commander of the camp where the tunnel was dug. The point being, of course, prisoners need to be guarded as though they were guilty, but they should still be treated as though they might be innocent. That's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.